The MiniMansioneerers and the Emerging Humanoids, Chapter 7. After watching and hearing so much about RoboKids, Jaden's own personal humanoid, then Molly Buttons had thought long and hard about it. She didn't know what to say, and she wanted to give an example of her own experiences with robots themselves. Yes, she'd worked years ago with some robo-maids when cleaning in the long corridors. There were long stretches of winding corridors, and it was a really lot of physical work, quite demanding on the calf muscles, and also on the arms also. Lots of stretching, pushing and heaving. So it was good that the robo-maids did all the work. But as she herself got tired, more towards the end of the long shifts, going up the long sloping corridors, on the multiple floors she'd done the cleaning, with the cleaning maids at. There were robo-maids, of course. There were groups of them, a whole haggle of bleepers that bleeped together. They were little machines that had grown in size over the years, about the size of a miniature person, really, a dwarf person, really. But they certainly weren't designed to look like people, Molly had said. No, but they didn't look anything like people at all. The robo-maids just simply did their simple hoovering up. But they had their motion sensors too, and they bounced off things and objects very gently in a smooth, rounding fashion. Going around objects, they could also retain information and know what areas they cleaned already, and also know any obstacles to motion sensor around. The robo-maids often bleeped at her multiple times because they were faster than Molly was able to keep up with, really. So by the end of the shifts, there were multiple robo-maids bleeping at her furiously, long bleeps that she'd be harassed down the hallways. She often felt chased down the halls by the groups of the robo-maids in a desperate effort to keep up with their efficient pace, because they were programmed in specific, simple simulation programs to do the cleaning. They wiped, dusted, mopped, and picked up things, as well as also spraying fragrances, various different multifunctional programs that they were able to do simply and efficiently. Indeed, the robo-maids had cleared out several rooms before she'd even reached that part of the corridor of the doors leading to them. Often the robo-maids were there bleeping down the corridor to her, long bleeping sirens, ushering her on to catch up. Well, those were not necessarily representative of her real experiences with all robots, of course, Molly had said, confidently. Yes, she didn't get on with the robo-maids. She complained about them often enough. Well, they sometimes did break down, the mechanics were often called out on them, or there was some malfunctioning incident and they had to be emptied on a regular basis. They were dirty and really yucky on the inside too, on account of all the dirt and dust that they'd had to accumulate when collecting all the trash going around. However old and faulty they could be, they were still relatively reliable and in service. She hated all the harsh, shrilly beeping that they all did, multiple beepings, and the loud beeps too that they gave down the long corridors when she'd struggled to keep up sometimes. Still, finally, she was able to ascertain and understand what all the different multiple beepings that the different multiple robo-maids were all making in unison. It took her a while to record what rooms were done, what cleaning in what rooms was done, and what cleaning rooms could not be done and had still to be. Once she'd understood all the robo-maids' bleeping orders and requests for the later jobs, and she'd given any emptying that they needed to them, and restored any power that she needed to, that was very rare, then on they would go with their robo-jobs. But nevertheless, she'd had a few different jobs, working with other robo-workers too, not just doing the robo-cleaning with the robo-maids. Yes, she complained about those to other colleagues, that they were a bit dirty at the end of the day. They didn't clean themselves. They had to be emptied and by others, and they had to be also pushed sometimes if they malfunctioned, and they were heavy too on those occasions. Had to be carried to a mechanic who couldn't get out sometimes, or they just had to be stored away, and she'd just use whatever robo-maids there were left to bleep at her or to carry out their functionings. Yes, they were dirty, but it wasn't that had annoyed her. It was their ultra efficiency in their program. They were still so good at doing it. She really was struggling to keep up, as with the other people as well. The robo-maid's efficiency, like the robo-factory workers also, their efficiency eclipsed other people's performances so much, really. It humbled her in some ways to see how strong or how quick that the robo-workers could really be. Those that she'd experienced, of course. Some of the robo-drivers were so fast and also efficient, swifting by her along the long stretches of corridor. Or the robo-giants at the industrial factory, where she and Jaden and the other colleagues all worked, working alongside the other robo-factory workers. There were giant robo-workers there that lifted giant weights of heavy pallets that had to be stacked up high onto a giant tower. Or there was the robot driving machine. It bleeped out various commands to watch out, to move and give it adequate space as it drove dozens and dozens of fully heavy stacked cages, carriaging them round, trailing it behind it. And it did give human recordings out, a personalised warning message, warning people to stand clear of its heavy passage driving through. But it was just a repetitive human voice that it gave out. And there were other robot workers too, repetitively giving out their same orders, requests, compliments, or even criticisms sometimes as well. Yes, there were a lot of the robot workers. They could either work faster than a person or lift heavier weights. That, or they could do multifunctioning tasks integrated all at one time that a human worker would clearly struggle to do. There was the human loader, for example. A human loader at the factory would load on something like 1,200 crates into a machine. It would stack those crates into a machine, loading it onto a moving conveyor belt that wound its way into the inner workings of a washing machine that washed tens of thousands of those with multiple human loaders putting things into those machines. Once the robot loaders themselves had been attached to the robot washing machine, that was a giant thing in itself, that they could load in up to 5,000 to 6,000 of the crates themselves. They could speed up the work efficiently 5 times faster than the average person. Some of the more advanced ones were 7 or 8 times faster, even though sometimes they did make mistakes and it jammed up the machine, sometimes overloading it. The machine washer itself sometimes struggled if the machine loader sometimes went too fast, so they too had to be in sync with each other. There was a maximum speed capacity, however limiting that would be to the robot stacker or the robot loader. There were many other robo workers there too, not just the robo driver, robo stacker, robo storer, many other robo workers that often would bleep out or have recorded repetitive human words, orders, requests, commandments, or they would just be warnings that were bleeped out sometimes to steer clear of it, because it was doing some heavy lifting job or going at high speed. Yes, she was familiar with those, but those robot workers, they looked and sounded nothing like people, except for a few of the times. But in general, most of the times, they never sounded anything like people. They never attempted to simulate people. No, the robo-maids themselves that she worked with, yes, they didn't actually look or act like people. They bleeped in their long sequences. They had a relatively simple language. What they bleeped to each other, she never knew about and didn't need to know anyway. But their relatively simple syntax, their simple sentences, where they would say multiple different beeps, 7 or 8 different things that they would tell her, according to the different pitch, emphasis, and tonage of the different types of bleeps that they would make. They would all make different sequences of those. They could only understand 8 or 9 different types of the bleeps, different sounds that they would make, squawks, squeaks, squawks. There were different pitches, different tonage that they would have for that, but they could have them in a whole sequence of different orders, so that would have different meanings. And she'd grown gradually to understand the simplistic robo-talk of the robo-maids. But no, they didn't really talk anything like people, not like Robo-Kit and some of the more advanced humanoids. They had a much more complex, well-rounded, more human, personal way of talking that simulated human talk, human conversation. Well, no, the robo-maids weren't artists. They didn't simulate artistic talks, no. Just direct orders, instructions mostly, really. Just giving out lists of different orders, but in multiple different ways. And that was really the primary function of the robo-maids. However much she laughed and had fun being around them and got annoyed and frustrated at them too, when they all were trying to talk to her all at the same time, giving their multiple complex sentences to her, bleeping in their different orders that would always be unique in their own way and construction. Each of the robo-maids had something different and unique to say in their workday to her. And why would they all bleep at the same time and not do it in an order? and not know to sort of do it one at a time. Still, the Robomaids functioned as individual robots and weren't really integrated into a wider Robomaiding cleaning program. That apparently was what one of the personal bosses had told her about it anyway, in explanation. And she could also always mute some of the Robomaids so that she could listen to them and take down their data in turn, in sequence, in order, so that she could do it as and when she was able to. Still, she had limited experience with those robots, however advanced she'd felt they were at the time. But they were nothing. They seemed like primitive robots now compared to the ultra efficient and the more accurate and the more humane simulations that the new humanoids were, that RoboKit was himself. Well, it was all relative, of course. RoboKit seemed really advanced compared to the RoboMaids themselves, because he simulated artistic conversations sometimes, philosophical conversations. You could even have programmed scientific conversations. He had lots of scientific knowledge, philosophical knowledge, and lots of answers that could be fed into him from the scriptwriting team, the program editors themselves, his creators. There was a whole co-creating group that had created the program themselves. That's what created a more artistic, well-rounded, a more holistic, fulfilled program, a more fulfilling, holistic simulation of a conversational talk, even if it was only really a simulation of that. Although there was an additional feature also that meant that it could also imitate other speeches that had been given into it, if it was that it was programmed to do that. You could give it consent to do that, and there were various mechanisms for accepting if for agreeing to accept whether RoboKit would take on and absorb new data. That it could record and then would ask you the option, is this something that I should record or not? RoboKit would ask many times whether it was something that should be integrated into the vocabulary. And there were a long list of words that RoboKit would never say, offensive items, phrases, and answers that he was forbidden to give. Although some of the answers, the random answers, they could sometimes seem offensive, sometimes if they were vague or poetic or nonsensical answers that made little sense, sometimes if it was an unfamiliar question that was given, that there was no experience of him in answering. Sometimes, of course, he'd mispronounce a word when trying to imitate what was heard, or would say it quite correctly, but would use it in the wrong time, or at the wrong place, or with the wrong people. So even when he had absorbed some data that he had listened to, and then you were able to program what that data was to be used when, and how it was to be integrated into what specific mini program that he had pre-installed, that took some while to do. But even then, you couldn't then adapt that and integrate it into all the other multifunctioning programs. You had to do it into each one. And those new programs wouldn't be personalized and specified to Kit's own specific personalized program. So there was a lot to it all, really. And a lot to consider, therefore, about buying those expensive new programs that might not fit in well and synchronize well with the personalized humanoid programs that had already come pre-prepared, pre-programmed within the humanoid robo-kit. I was never into robots or humanoids. I had no robo-fetish, robophilia, nothing of the sort in the past, assured Jaden once more, going on a little bit more to protest about it, and saying that he really wasn't that into it, and he could give it up if he needed to. When Molly had said how attractive the design of the model that he'd chosen, and then asked him why he'd chosen a particularly attractive one, was that even necessary for a robo-dance partner or for robo-physiotherapy programs? Did it matter what he looked like or his aesthetic appeal? Well, after some embarrassed, flushed, blushing look, turning a little red, and looking away from her, diverting his eyes, Jaden finally then, after an embarrassed silence, had said, yes, it was pleasing to have a model to look at, that was a part of it, but not really that important, really. Yes, I suppose he was handsome, he'd admitted, that he had that aesthetic appeal about him, but it was more his overall design that was important, that he was a bulky, large build, that he had broad shoulders for firm support, that he was a reasonably good length and stature, and that he had also long arms, the long arms that could be stretched out for the support exercises, and the various movements too for the dance as well that could be more suitable for more specific dance movements. He also had the ability, though he didn't use it much, for reaching up high to things as well. So his actual posture, his own physical design and his build, yes, that had some usefulness to it. The fact that he was broad, that he was well built, and he was a reasonable heavy size meant that he was sturdy and strong, and that he could be weighed down easily and not pushed over easily. He also was able to push down with some pressure and force, as well as having and adjusting the posture to make sure that he was anchored in and had a firm positioning when stood upright, or when stood in a variety of postures. He had quite a heavy build, and with his own mechanism within it, did weigh about 9 or 10 stone himself. So it was a bulky, heavyish enough build, although it was a slim enough design as well. Yes, it was aesthetically pleasing. He admitted that, even more embarrassed though, blushing more now. Yes, okay, the high raised cheekbones, the handsome chiselled out features, the dark tortoiseshell brown eyes, the slightly wild hair that was a little unkept, but not too much, the dandelion-esque look, slightly bohemian, where he was a little casual, but not too wild. And he had this kind of long, thin neck as well, and he looked kind of young and a little youthful, but also a little muscly. He'd gone for a model that wasn't too physio, too muscly. He didn't need any really big muscly worker or robot humanoid, not for the physio workouts that he'd be doing anyway. There were other humanoid, more advanced, physical, stronger bodies that you could design and that you could buy, in fact, or hire out or whatever. Or borrow even, some people would. But actually, he didn't need it for those purposes anyway, and so it wasn't necessary. So the design of him, he didn't need one that was ultra muscly or that had a strong physical design in it anyway. As long as it was really able to lift and do some basic movements, that was enough really. And the actual inner metallic kind of structure within it that actually moved, those various parts that were metallic replications of the bones, that moved the joints of the arm, the leg, that moved the different muscles and parts of the body, those had a metallic structure within it, so were strong and sturdy anyway. It was only really the outer coating of those, the simulation silicon synthetic skin, that gave the appearance of the muscles anyway. So it didn't really matter to have something that looked muscly or not. That was purely an aesthetic appeal, a choice, a personal choice. And really, he admitted it was just a subjective one, a personal one. Yes, he had a few smaller muscles, but nothing too much. And it was only really his own personal choice, and that could have been changed anyway. It was more important that the actual mechanized, actual structure within itself was functional and was able to work efficiently, rather than how it actually looked. But I did choose him, yes, because it's also appealing to look at, I suppose, admitted Jaden. Had to make a few adaptations, but only a few really. You can really choose any design. There's any shape, size, colour, all different styles that there are out there. So many different prosthetics that there are really. They all look authentic really, because they're actually modelled, simulated on real people. Rambled on Jaden, as if working for the simulator company as a sales agent himself, because of his strong belief and perhaps his positive experience with RoboKit so far. Perhaps he was working for robo producers or for the robo company that had bought and sold it to him, the simulator company, or the sales agent that had worked on behalf of the simulator company. Maybe he'd embroiled Kit into working for him or something, and then lured Jaden into getting some money out of it, into trying to sell on other humanoids. Molly wasn't sure. She doubted it, but she wasn't really too sure. She hoped not. No, she doubted that he was really. She looked at the creased leaflets, the pamphlets that had pictures of all the different humanoid models moving on them. Saw how folded and creased and stained they'd been over the months, as if he'd been looking at new programs of RoboKit, looking at what to buy or something, multiple times. But the old creased leaflets stood stained to the side, to show Molly what many of the other different humanoids could do. That's why he'd got them out, just to show her the sheer variety. That there were also robo-carers, robo-dancers, robo-shoppers. There were a whole variety of all different kinds of robo-humanoids. Different humanoids that were pre-programmed to do a whole variety of different multi-functioning sequences in different complex simulations. And at the cost of them all, wow, it's an amazing amount. I'd be dead before I could afford any of them, moaned Molly, looking at even some of the more simpler humanoid models in the catalogue. Looking at the high cost, gosh, the multifunctional model, even the most simple ones seem to cost so much. You'd be better off paying a person, hiring a personal assistant or something, declared Molly. Oh, well, there is actually the deposit you put down, and you get all of that back if it's returned in a reasonable condition. And, most of them are, a lot of the time. The reviewers said that actually they were relatively easy to clean, to maintain, relatively low risk as well, and low cost to maintain as well. You'll get all of the deposit back, in fact, if it's returned kind of in a reasonably good condition as it was. And it so far, touch metal, it has been. So it's some of the ultra functional models are really costly, vastly much more though, of course, beyond even what I could do. And what the simulator doctor was able to recommend. They're just trialing out some of the simulation humanoids just to see how some experimental trials go, really. Because they haven't decided what it would be like here, because it's never been trialed out yet. So I've agreed to do it, and then I report back to them regularly, to the simulator doctors, just to let them know how it's going. I report back to them weekly. There's weekly video talks that we have with simulator doctor, who basically we just assess how I'm getting on with RoboKit, how our simulation exercises have been going, and that. So it pays off a little bit of it because it's part of a trialing experiment as well. And then they make a video with all the other experimenters with their experiences with their humanoids too. So that's going to be featured in some sort of trial experimental documentary at some point, potentially. I don't know. That takes off some of the cost anyway. Still, the rest of the deposit I would have to pay back fully anyway. But I hope not to. I mean, I hope that I don't have to go without the deposit. I hope that I am able to get it back. Just because it is a lot still, despite that. Well, nothing's happened so far. It hasn't malfunctioned, and I'm guessing if it hasn't after all these months, then it won't. I've known about humanoids for years, but I didn't know that they could be this advanced, and I didn't know that they would have this many complex programs that would be integrated either. I had no idea about that, until I got RoboKit a few months ago. Just had no idea that there was even a trialing experiment of them. I was just amazed just to discover it and find out about it. They all look just so expensive. I guess it's all so new, just all trialing it out here at least, stated Molly, handing over back the stained and creased catalogues that she returned back now onto the table. As if she was upset that she was perhaps priced out of this great robotic dream somehow, that Jaden too and others could be too, locked outside the gates of this robotic paradise, if it could be that, or robotic limbo as it seemed and sounded more like. Or was it really anything like that, and not really just robotic delusions, really, robotic madness, as she suspected it might be, wasn't sure, but didn't want to say openly, not to Jaden, not to a humanoid lover, or a humanoid aficionado, or humanoid experimenter, or humanoid subject of a humanoid trial, or whatever he was, perhaps. She didn't want to voice openly what her real concerns were about the potential robot delusion, robophilia, if he was over-relying on it, perhaps too much. No, she wasn't sure whether it was robot madness of some sort of robo-paraphilia. She didn't know enough about that, to be honest. That she'd be better off without that, she was sure, but she didn't know Jaden or other situations that well. After all, he had been quite alone, without other people, and without able to go out and see people quite regularly either, and quite ill and alone with it, and having to do all the physio workouts. Perhaps the robot physiotherapy programs could have provided some support with that, and perhaps some of the dance programs that RoboKit did, perhaps that could be a little entertaining as an extension of that too, just to make some of the exercise program a little more fun for him. She could understand that much at least, but she had her doubts and worries and wondered how far he'd gone with his robotic humanoid exercising? How far had the humanoid dances really gone with Jaden and RoboKit? That she wasn't really sure about. Yes, she still had her doubts, but didn't really want to ask too much more. Yes, suppose it could be a little useful, and even a little fun, perhaps, from what she'd seen of it, and him. Yet it was also a lot of time to devote to it, a lot of energy, a lot of money, and it had a little risk as well attached to it, given what people might think. As it was a new emerging thing, it could be somewhat taboo, it could be laughed at, as he'd suggested, but did it really serve any serious and necessary function to people that could really benefit from it, potentially like him? That she wasn't too sure about, nor what the potential risks of it really could be either. There are options also to rent them out, went on Jaden, after a long while, drinking more. If you only need them for short-term use, for an injury or something that's going to heal, or just when you're trapped at home for a short while or something, while your partner's away or whatever, for just a short time, you can always just get one, and then you get the deposit back as well, if it doesn't get damaged or anything too much, said Jaden, as if he was now on a commission from the Androcera programmers or the simulator salesman that had sold it to him, or whatever they were. Can't imagine I would ever get one, to be honest with you, said Molly, after hesitation. Well, no, you wouldn't need to. I mean, you're well enough to go out, sort of. You can work quite well and you can socialise. You're able to go out still. Of course you don't need one. No, said Jaden, a little offended at this. But I mean, anyway, if anything ever happens, hopefully it never would, touch metal. If you ever got ill, though, like me, maybe you would depend on it as well, though. Well, no, I mean, you've got your family that will care for you. Your sons would look after you, surely. I know they would look after you, said Jaden, trying to reassure Molly, regretting having brought it up now. I don't know, would they? Asked Molly to herself, as much as to him, unsure that her sons would, if she became ill for a long time. Yes, she said after thought. If it was an emergency for a short time, they would. I think they would for a while. And my aunt, she definitely would as well. I wouldn't want to ask her to, unless it was an emergency. She's not well herself, but she certainly would be able to help a little bit with me. And my sons would want to, absolutely. But I wouldn't want them to, unless, it was a real emergency and I needed them or something for a longer time. If it was a long time, said Molly, almost trying to defend her own sons against her own accusation of them, potentially. No, I wouldn't expect for them to care for me. They've got their own lives to lead. I mean, they've got their jobs, careers, one of them. They've got partners, they've got friends of their own. They've got their own lives, really. One day they'll have children of their own family to focus on too. Well, they won't want to focus on spending the whole time with their old mum if they need to, said Molly, speculating about a potential future, one that she didn't want to consider for herself. Well, I don't know. I have people that could visit. I just don't know, really. Well, if I ever do get that bad and I'm alone with it, I suppose if I lost contact with others, yes, it's potentially something I could consider if that happened, admitted Molly now, seeing that her words had described Jaden's position. But it was something she didn't want to contemplate, not for herself or others. But potentially there were other vulnerable people in his position, people that were socially isolated, or that had physical as well as social problems and mental problems that meant they were limited in how often they could go out, where they could go out, when they could go out, or who they could go out with as well. I'm sorry, I can see why you'd get one. I can see in your position, because you are in a difficult position. I'm sorry, said Molly apologetically, now restraining herself. I'm sorry, without your family and your friends around, I guess being with the illness, it has been hard for you. I'm sure of it. I just think you'd still rather have a person round. Once you're able to go out, whenever you are in the future, you could go out, you'll get out more and you'll start seeing people. And I can visit occasionally. And, your aunt, like you said, she'll visit occasionally. I know you don't always get on that well and she's difficult. She's awkward to get along with sometimes, but she still cares. And, you get on a little bit with each other and you can see other friends eventually. You still have the video talks with them. Have you ever thought about hiring your own personal assistant, though? Or home care or something? Or even a private dancer. Who knows? For all that money, hiring out RoboKit, maybe it would work out better. Even though you wouldn't get the deposit back on them. Well, I mean, you wouldn't be doing that with them, would you?" Molly had said, now trailing off, unsure if she'd asked the wrong question of him, not wanting to embarrass him further. Jaden had now pondered the answer a long time. Then, before saying, with all his grief that he'd had recently, and then being alone for such a long time, and then with the new injury on top of that, on top of the RSI he'd had a long time, that had exacerbated the RSI, and with such a new and strange injury that had lasted so long, a few months being alone with it, and already having that social anxiety from before anyway, but now with the additional injuries and the grief and all the hardship combined that had accumulated, he didn't really know if having other people around with unpredictable behaviours and habits, if that would be just too much while he was so ill and in often a lot of pain and just struggling so much, really. Because whatever limitations that RoboKit had, even if it only really simulated multiple complex programs in synchronized, and that's as much as it could really do, although you could adapt them a little, but they were really still only simulated programs, simulated reactions to what it had scanned and experienced so far. However boring and unpredictable its routines could be, that could be refined and changed, yes, it could slip into being boring and just mechanical, repetitive, of course. But yet it was reliable as well when you were having to do the same kind of exercises every day, enduringly, for hundreds of days on end, for months during the process of gradual slow recovery that it would gradually take after the serious injury. And so having something to do that, to support you, for several hours sometimes, of most days of the week, 5 or 6, sometimes every day, for many months on end. It was reliable and predictable as it needed to be, and depended on to be leaned upon. In that sense, there was good in it. But in terms of its emotional support, in terms of its simulation of conversations and its simulating emotions, as it did to a varying extent, that had its limitations too, yes. But RoboKit never stole from you, never told lies about you, nor about others either. It never spread rumours, it never got too drunk and malfunctioned, and it never became abusive to you, to others, to strangers or family. It never touched anyone or anything without being asked to first. It never did anything in that way, not in a way that he hadn't asked him to, Jaden had said in defence of RoboKit somewhat, and he never had to worry about some awful shock therefore with him, that RoboKit would somehow do something disturbing or awful that would just shock him. RoboKit never tried to manipulate or cheat him in any way, or deliberately hurt him. He only did what Jaden had really asked him to, and that was all. That was all he ever could do, really. As if RoboKit was a person on trial, Molly had thought, as he described it. Thinking, though, after a respectful pause, after they'd said all of the long lecture, Molly wasn't sure then what to think of it. That was perhaps all true, yet neither would RoboKit really surprise him, not with a lovely gesture, not with a spontaneous act of love or something unexpected. No, but Molly hadn't wanted to say that to him straight away in defence of other people. And in Kit's defence, of course, Jaden had given his long speech, and also his own company's defence as well, defending the simulator company, defending Humanoids, those that he knew well, the models of them that he got on with, and defending his own position also. He'd said it all. Jaden had said, actually, you could also sometimes have those spontaneous acts of love that Molly had briefly mentioned. Well, it was possible to some extent. That was only possible, really, to program RoboKit to do something that was not expected at a certain time. So although it could be a familiar program that he would simulate, doing a simulated action or simulated dance, you could do it at a different time that you wouldn't expect it of him at. So, yes, you could program him to do a random lovely thing, like sing a song or do a funny dance, or say something beautiful, something, but do it at a random, unpredictable time. Well, it doesn't really sound like it would be that funny to hear singing randomly if it was in the middle of the night, or when you were at a serious discussion group or something. He could do it at a terrible time. That kind of random programming was no better than a drunk, surely, said Molly, exuberated, thinking that this was ridiculous. No, no, and it really has its limitations doing that. I would only do that at home and just for fun. You could do that in a over just a few hours, just when you're having fun yourself with it, and it's just nothing too much. You can have like different random programs together, ones you are familiar with, but just shuffled together in an order that would just be strange or something interesting and different. It's not something you'd regularly do, not when you're out with others, of course not. The only other way that you could simulate really having a spontaneous love or something, as you called it, a spontaneous act of love or something, well, the only real way of doing that is really if you have a co-programmer, sorry, suggested Jaden. Molly had raised her eyebrows, unsure at this, sitting forwards in the chair, eager now to know more about the co-programmer, of what that could be. Well, basically where you can update and adapt the programs already that the humanoid had. So if I had a co-programmer with RoboKit, then we'd both be updating, adapting his current programs, adapting it together, editing his pre-programmed routines, doing it together. So yes, if one of us did it without the other knowing, took it in turns doing it, co-programming RoboKit, then that would be different. Some people in Megatronian worlds, the Megatronites that are familiar with the humanoids, some of them do that. They have co-programmers. So some couples will have a relationship with one humanoid together, where they are co-programming, cohabiting together. They share the same house and they share the same humanoid together. But there are other couples that don't like to do that and think it's just weird. And they will both have their own separate humanoids. So they do the programming of their own humanoids separately from each other. People, Megatronites do it really differently. Some couples, they don't like to have any humanoids. Some will just have one for them both to integrate and their co-programmers together. And others just do separate, they write their own separate programs separately. So it does vary really. The only way you'd have that spontaneous act of love from RoboKit is if somebody else was also involved, co-programmed together, suggested Jaden, but he'd never really seriously thought about doing it. Molly said it would be something to consider, but he should really get to know the co-programmer first, especially if he was concerned about what might happen with RoboKit himself and was still learning with it. Perhaps it was better to wait and get to meet another programmer first that he got to know well before agreeing to any such thing. Well, perhaps he couldn't then do any spontaneous acts of love, not if he was alone with RoboKit, admitted Jaden. Jaden had shrugged before then drinking more of the wine, onto a seventh or countless glass. He then conceded, of course. RoboKit did have the limitations, of course, when he was programmed alone, just by him. When it was a monogamous relationship with just him and the humanoid alone, there were severe limitations to that, of how spontaneous it could ever really be, of course. He wasn't around then to replace other people, only really to support him while he was away and away from other people, until he could then return to being out and to socialise and work and play with other people again. He could be just a complement to his relationships with others then. He could retain RoboKit when he finally went out to visit others again, to dance with others, talk with others, work with others, live with others, ramble with others, argue with others, make up with others, to live with others again. When he finally returned to thoroughly, fully living with others again, then still perhaps he wouldn't give up RoboKit. If he was still a complement to his other human relationships, if it was a robotic relationship that complemented human relationships rather than just a replacement or a conflict to compete against the human relationships with. But he wasn't sure because he'd not gone out with RoboKit, not to around other people. He went out with RoboKit to empty corridors, lonely corridors, ghost corridors, just the places that they'd be alone at, really, because he liked to be alone with RoboKit together, while he was still learning about his old programs, but in new situations, and still learning how to deal with him and adapt his programming. Well, after listening to the long lecture, Molly had apologised, feeling that perhaps she'd gone too far in her questioning of criticising the object of Jaden's fascinations. The only way, maybe, that he could spontaneously care then is really if someone else was co-programming RoboKit with me. But actually, I haven't met the right programmer. Not for that to happen yet. Yeah, I've met a few that I casually get on well with, absolutely, but it hasn't got to that point that I would want to co-program with someone. Not fully. I don't know. I'd have to trust and get to know them and spend a lot more time with a programmer to know if I could ever co-program with RoboKit. I don't think I could share RoboKit with anyone unless I knew them really well. I'd have to know them like so well. They'd have to be like a brother or like a best friend or just like someone as well as yourself, for the good, for better or worse, that sort of thing, said Jaden, looking over, defensively, protectively, at RoboKit. But I'm not a robot obsessive. I'm not like a robophiliac. Nothing like that, though. I know there's robophobic people that are putting that out. They're smearing people that are having personal humanoid relationships. And they would smear me too, mock me, ridicule me. That's what they would laugh at all of us about. Because they just think it's robophilia or something weird. It's not a robot confession. It's not an obsession, said Jaden, a little too over the top, a little too protesting. Molly had thought, though, wondering if it perhaps was that, though. You're sure, though? I mean, you're not robot obsessed or anything. You're not taking too much into all of this? Asked Molly, finally. Well, I have become a little obsessed with working with Kit's programs, but I always do. I get obsessive in my pet projects, always anyway. I've never had really a strong interest in humanoids, never before. And then suddenly when I discovered it and I did all the research, hundreds of hours of that and all the training, and then I met other humanoid users or other humanoid lovers, humanoid friends, some people call them, other humanoid subjects. That's what the Dr. Simulator called them. When I met other simulator users, people that were cohabiting with humanoids, then I did a lot of research and training. And since then, yeah, I've done a lot of work. Since I met the simulator company, I spent a lot of time. I suppose I have been a bit obsessive in the amount of time that I've spent working with Kit and training with him. Even though some of that has been useful, has had other purposes to train my own body and to sort of do the exercise workouts as well. Well, said Molly after some consideration, crossing her legs, sitting back, looking over, scanning now Jaden, and looking at the room, and looking at RoboKit slouched in his posture, wondering if he was always turned off, slumped like that, or whether he couldn't just simulate sleeping or resting sometimes. It would be less eerie, and seem like he was not like a living corpse less. I suppose you've been alone for so long. Since you've been off work with the injury, it has been so long, said Molly, slowing her words a little, trying to be more sympathetic now, feeling a little bad now that she may have been judging him a little more without knowing his situation, in his poor physical, perhaps even mental and social condition. Perhaps he was desperate and had needed and been depending on the humanoid programs. You won't tell anyone, though, at the actual work. Don't tell any of the colleagues, please. Just don't tell anyone about it. Promise me, asked Jaden suddenly, now looking at concern, with his eyes flickering over to the doorway, looking at the doorway to the outside world, to the corridor of strangers, to unknown people beyond. Please, he said, pleading once more, please don't tell anyone about it. I know some people would be all right, but others they wouldn't get it, or they'd laugh. And you know what some of them are like at work? They laugh at anything. Oh, they would love it, some of them. Well, what's to tell? Said Molly with a shrug, uncrossing her legs, sitting casually upright, slopping her glass of wine around. There's nothing to tell, is there, really? I just watched you doing some robot dance. So what? You just practiced some robo dancing or did some robot exercise program. There's nothing much in it, is there, really? Yeah, I don't think anyone would see anything that bad in it. Certainly not a crime anyway, is it? Asked Molly, a little defensive of him, but unsure how other people would react, really. Yeah, most people would just see it was just something to laugh at, a bit of light fun, and nothing that serious. I don't know, some of them would probably just see it as crazy and another reason to laugh or mockery. You know what some of them are like at work? They'll laugh at anyone, and they're always mocking me anyway. There's Lona Jaden, they'd say. So sad, has to dance with robots. They'll probably be calling me Dances with Robots. That'll be my term or something that they tease me with for months on end. I don't know. Oh, nonsense. Don't be ridiculous, scolded Molly. They will never go on about it that long. They haven't got that long memories. They soon move on to other things to laugh about. We've all got embarrassing, silly things to laugh at. Anyway, why would you expose yourself to robot dancing at a factory? I wouldn't tell them anyway. Why should I? I think some of them would be concerned about you. Some of them I think might laugh, you're right. But after a few, minutes or hours, the joke would wear thin. They couldn't laugh about it for weeks on end. The same tired, boring joke. They soon get bored of it. And it's just their banter. They tease everyone. They always laugh about anyone. Why would you ever want to tell them or advertise it anyway? I wouldn't, said Jaden after listening to her defence of her colleagues. I would never want to advertise it. That's what I'm asking you. Don't tell them. Because it is embarrassing. Some people would just find it a little too weird. And also, they might wonder what else there is with it. Or they might speculate on other weird things that aren't true, that are just things I'm not doing. And some of them would they would laugh about it for a long time. The name would stick. I'd be the robo-dancer forevermore. I don't want that. There's too much robophobia out there. It's stigmatized too much because it's too new, went on Jaden. All right, you convinced me. I'm not going to tell anyone anyway. I never said I would. I never would. If you'd rather I didn't, and I didn't ask to find out, I just happened to discover, and you told me, you volunteered all the information, but I promise you, solemnly, hand on heart now, she said, actually placing her right hand, pushing it into her heart. I will promise you I wouldn't tell anyone, she said, slightly drunkenly, slurring the words. None of the colleagues need to know anyway. They wouldn't all laugh at it. The ones that would laugh at everything. They laugh at me all the time. I'm always called Shorty, even if you're lanky or Robo Boy or whatever it was. They won't call you the Robo Dancer if they found out. If they would, who cares anyway? But I won't tell anyone, I promise you that, said Molly once more, trying to reassure his fears. What did you mean, though? Said Jaden after some time, consideration, accepting her reassurance with a nod now. Assured that she won't tell anyone, feeling that he knew her well enough to trust her on that at least. But what did you mean, saying some of them would be concerned? Why would they be concerned? I mean, RoboKit can't hurt me. He can't do anything that I don't ask him to. Well, I had a few minor injuries, but nothing serious. That was my own mistake, messing around with him. I just trying it out and playing with it too much. I should have taken it more seriously. Because at the beginning, it was just a real work to actually understand it. And I had to do it seriously. When I was mucking about with it in the early stage, it went too fast and too deep. And it went too kind of heavy into some of the movements, the ones I wasn't familiar around. I was experimenting with some of the actual new packages while I was learning about his different multifunction programs. And I just went into it like for fun at first when I was trying out the dance programs. And I got a little hurt. It was only a minor injury, though. But is that what they were worried about? Is that what you mean? You're concerned about? Asked Jaden, trailing off. A little joke. A little drunk now. And Molly interrupted him. No, I hadn't really meant that, actually. Well, I'm sorry to hear it got injuring you. You injured yourself, though. I guess you said because you did the programming wrong, or you did it where you were drunk, or you just weren't as focused. You were sort of just mucking around with it. Exactly, said Jaden. I will never do that again. I've always done the serious programs since then, with the new ones. It's never mucking around or playful. Because the first few times when you're refining the different algorithms of the program, you've really got to be serious and attentive to it. It takes a lot of work to refine it, to adapt it. It's a real... Is that what you meant, though, that they would be concerned, the other colleagues, that RoboKit could hurt me because they've heard about other humanoids hurting other people? Molly had shrugged. No, not exactly. I suppose I was worried, and I thought others might be. Just that they might think that it's that you're having a relationship with it, or that you're depending on it too much, said Molly, struggling to find the words now. Trying to navigate around the emotional minefield of the different embarrassing situations that she didn't want to go into talking about. Well, I'd rather it was just kept between us, really. There's a lot of robophobia going on out there because it's so new. And even people at work, that have work colleagues with the robo workers, even some of them, that are getting robo-friends, even they get smeared with it. So what would a robo-partner, that they'd be hated or they'd be ridiculed, humiliated? No, please don't tell anyone. Please, Jaden, once more. If they found out I'm living with one too, dancing with one, experimenting with one, or doing the exercising with one, I'd be a laughingstock. You know that, said Jaden. Yes, okay. I've already said that. Trust me, don't you? I promised already. On our relationship, I promise, reasserted Molly once more. I think the other colleagues would have been a little concerned, and as I am a little too. Well, perhaps a few would laugh, but a few would be concerned, I think, if I'm honest. Perhaps they might just be concerned for you, some of them actually, said Molly, trying to defend her colleagues now, feeling that they weren't all jokers that would just laugh at anyone's insecurities and embarrassments and mock them on a regular basis. Why? Why would they be so concerned? What's to be worried about? I mean, they're watching all these videos about humanoids that have hurt people or done stuff, but those have been remotely controlled by others. That's nothing to do with the humanoid design itself. And those are so rare that ever happens. You know, a humanoid is very unlikely to be hurt or to hurt other people. It's very rare it ever happens. Why would they be concerned for me? What's to be concerned about? Asked Jaden, shrugging his shoulders in defense of the humanoid himself, echoing the words that the simulator salesman at the simulator company had told him, that bought the humanoid from the humanoid suppliers from the Megatronian worlds. Well, it's more than that. I think they'd also be concerned, well, for your emotional state as well. You know, if you're only simulating conversations with Robo Kid, whatever you call him, then you're not having real conversations with real people. And if you're only simulating robotic dances with Robo Kid, you're not having real dances or real exercises with people and anything like that, really. I suppose it's just that you could become too dependent on it as much. But I think that's it, really, explains Molly, not wanting to go on and say she was also concerned potentially about how far some of those robo programs could also be going and what they also involved potentially. But they can never really hurt me, you know, the RoboKit program, because as long as I do it sensibly and seriously, if I study it well before I use it, then it's okay to do it, and it's relatively safe in that way. It's educational. So he only does what I program it to do, or what it's pre-programmed to do already. So as long as I'm familiar with the pre-programs, I am already. And if I study the new programs that are adapted and integrated into it, then I have to study it really well to be able to know and do it. And then it's relatively safe. You know, humanoids are not a real danger to other people if you do it sensibly, seriously, and with all the right training. There's a humanoid program teacher, as well as all the humanoid tutorials that I go to. There are lots of humanoid videos. There's humanoid manuals. There's loads of guidance and books and training programs, humanoid tutorials that you can get. There's loads of it. And as long as you spend enough time doing it, the humanoid is relatively safe to operate, as long as you understand the humanoid programs and you can use them well enough. Then there's nothing to be concerned about. So you shouldn't be concerned, and neither should the other colleagues. So, explained Jaden, trying to reassure Molly and potentially other hypothetical people he might meet their reassurances. So, basically, I think it's people's robophobia because they've only seen aggressive robots or hard robots, never soft robots, really. You know, they're only familiar with RoboCop or the Terminator or robo drivers or strong robo workers. You know, the robo stackers, robo storers, robo drivers at work, or your robo maids. They bleep at you all the time, and they only know those kind of limited number of robot workers. So basically, because a lot of people haven't lived, worked, experienced, they haven't exercised with humanoids, they haven't played with humanoids, worked with humanoids, never mind danced with humanoids, so they have such limited experiences with the humanoid, they generally often see them as just advanced robot workers, really, even though they're completely different. They are so different that they look nothing like it, move nothing like it, they sound nothing like it, right? But yet, they're both called robots, but they're so very different on different ends of the evolutionary scale. So you can't, but people still judge the humanoids because of their lack of experience directly with them on their limited experience with robot workers. Like, so, and also those kind of films that they've seen on RoboCop and all the different things like Terminator, that you've heard of. They just don't know anything about robo-carers, robo-comforters. Probably never heard of a robo-dancer at all. Never mind a robo-physiotherapist, said Jaden, saying that it was the unfamiliarity with the new types and the broader range of different subjective humanoids that were now on the market, that were not known, but that were being judged for the earlier robot workers, that were limited in their abilities, in their behavioural styles, and in their simulation abilities. It's only doing what you program it to do, though. It's only really doing what you are programming it to do yourself, though. So it can't hurt you, I guess. Or what the company that had programmed it to do, suggested Molly, trying to clarify what it was. Exactly. It only does what it was already pre-programmed to do from the company program that you buy it from. So you've got to be quite clear and understand exactly what it is you're getting from it, and have researched and studied and trained on doing it and operating it well. So when you're familiar yourself, once it becomes a family program, you use your family robotic program, and then you can adapt the programming a little, tweak it here and there to your own needs, or you can sort of sequence it. That's what it's called. So you then cut and splice it. You can sort of cut up various of the mega programs, the familiar mega programs. You cut them up, splice them into more smaller segments, and then you sequence the different mega particles of the mega programs into creating then a different kind of program. It's a bit complicated. I don't really go in for doing all that, really, said Jaden, looking again, casting his eyes at the technical manuals, filled with long lists of jargon terms, that Molly's eyes perused over, looking at briefly, that she couldn't really understand, decipher what the different symbols appeared to mean, though. Now, I began on the slower settings of the family programs from the simulation company that sold RoboKits. I had to follow a lot of the instructions. The training and of the operations took weeks and weeks, really, just to become able to do it at all. And so, yeah, I guess I found it easier than going to an actual dance class, really, in a way, because I couldn't go out at the time. And also, I could have a dance partner and a dance trainer in one that could actually teach and instruct, as well as actually showing what the dance was, and that could actually do it with you as it was, that can simulate the dance with you. I could never afford to go to an expert dance trainer and to have a one-to-one over so long anyway. So for me, I suppose it was multifunctional. That was the purpose. That was the attraction of having it, really. The fact that RoboKit can follow multifunctions and multifunctional programs that are all synchronized and working together. That's actually what made it attractive. The fact that it has a physiotherapy program as well as the dancing program and the simulated conversation program. I didn't need that, but that was a great addition that sort of really makes it a more personal caricature of a program as well. So the fact that those were all, integrated and then synchronized together with those aspects, that's what made it kind of, much more attractive, really. Explained Jaden now, finalising his speech that he was giving to Molly about his own perceived benefits as experiences with the humanoids. It is just dancing that you're doing with it, though, asked Molly finally, and Jaden had given a hesitated reply, a shrug. Well, he does do massages, he finally admitted after a while, saying that too was part of a physio program, that there were various miniature physio programs that then could be sequenced together in a larger physio workout program. It just really focuses on the back and shoulders and just doing some really simple techniques really of it. There's nothing more to it than that, really. Just sequencing different movements. You can adjust the speed, the depth, and there's different sequencing of them too, said Jaden. Yes, that's all there really is to it, I suppose, he'd said, followed by an uncertain, almost an awkward silence then, as if unsure how far to go and what to describe to her about it. Okay, sometimes I even give it a hug, a warm embrace. I hold on to him, just because it's something to reassure me. It's comforting, admitted Jaden finally. You hug him, or just you hold on to him? inquired Molly, uncertain. Yeah, sometimes I do. Sometimes when I felt alone. It's just been comforting, I suppose. Something to hold on to, cling to. I know it's a bit sad, and I do it sometimes. Anyway, it's there you are, now. I sometimes have clung to him. I cling to him and hold him, have a hug sometimes. But because he does feel like a person to hold on to. And he has a little body heat generated from the internal heater that airs him out. So he feels a little hot, not too warm to touch, but he's a little hot and a little heated. And so trailed off Jaden, noticing now that Molly's confused, perplexed look, that she looked more uncertain now on hearing this. What, you actually lie down with him? You're led down holding or cuddling him in some way, are you? Asked Molly, uncertain. Yes, I sometimes do. Just because, it keeps me insulated. Well, I feel warmer and I feel cosy and comfortable with him, that's all. I just like it. Sorry, it's not hurting anyone, is it? You're actually sleeping with him in the bed, or with it, said Molly, now correcting herself, feeling bad and regretting that she'd said the gender neutral term. You are sleeping with it, or using it as a sort of a comforting device or something, said Molly, struggling for the words. Not all the time. Sometimes I did. Yeah, because I felt lonely sometimes, I guess. Because it was easy to do some of the massage exercise in bed as well. And so, yeah, I suppose rather than carrying it or programming to go elsewhere, it's just felt, it's something I did and I have done sometimes, said Jaden, now feeling embarrassed, blushing red as he turned away from her, not being able to meet her gaze. It's not hurting anyone, he reminded her once more, as if in defence again. Oh, I know you're not. I know that. But I just worry about how it's affecting you, really. You're not actually going any further. You're not doing anything more than that. Does it even have that as a function? Asked Molly awkwardly. Oh, you don't have to answer anything. Sorry. No, I've gone too far with it all. Sorry, said Molly now, changing her mind. Don't feel you've got to ask anything. I know it's personal. Sorry. I shouldn't have asked. No, it's okay. I've got nothing to hide. I don't mind saying anything. I have a cuddle with Robo Kit sometimes because he feels like a person and because, I just found it kind of comfortable to sleep in, really. Sometimes it was just easier for my sleeping. I felt, because it's a large enough bed anyway, as you can see, it doesn't do that much more. Well, it does have a function, actually, if you need to know. Oh, I don't need to know anything, abruptly shouted Molly. If you're happy to tell me, I'm happy to listen if you want to, but you don't have to, restated